All right, welcome back again. We have another incredible story to be able to share with you guys. I honestly get so excited about these stories because I get to hear the truth behind what life is like. It's too many times we have podcasts that are out there that they talk about all of the big highlights and all of the big wins that we've had, and we don't talk about the hard knocks, or we don't talk about the bends in the road. So today, this episode, we have Analisa with us. This is actually Tim Wood's wife. Or Tim is your husband, depending on how you want to identify, right? So, but I know that they work together. We've met through the Lego shows, the conventions, and then just kind of build a friendship out through, spending time together, eating meals together. And it's been really good. And then learning more about the story. The story that I know, I'm excited to be able to hear from Analisa today on this episode, because there's a lot of really cool learning lessons that I know that you've shared with me, and actually Zach was there too. You shared with us, and so we just want to try to get those on recording because I think it's going to impact people. I really do. I'm like I said, I'm really excited for that. So anyway, welcome. Thank you. Awesome to have you.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you so much for giving us the privilege to share this story with others.
Yeah. So let's get started. And as always, let's start with the growing up beliefs. Let's start with what you thought your story was going to be like as a child, and stepping into some of the adulthood of life. Like, what did you have as far as expectations, and what did you think was going to be a reality?
Sure.
Like what was that like?
All right. Well, I am one of 7 kids. My parents both came from large families. And so when they got together and got married, they knew that they wanted 7 kids. And I'm the second oldest of the 7. And with that, I have 3 of my 5 brothers that have Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And so as a child, my parents, from the very beginning, raised all 7 of us in a godly home. And so my whole life as a child, growing up, for 18 years, I was in a godly environment. And my parents did a wonderful job making sure that they were feeding us spiritually as well as, food on the table. But because of the disabilities of my brothers, life wasn't easy at all. We grew up on a 200-acre farm, and there was a lot of times that we weren't able to get to church, trying to transport 7 kids and 3 in wheelchairs. And so my parents always made it a goal to make sure that we always had God's word, at our fingertips. And then they always lived by setting a good example as well. And so when I was younger, though, my parents did take us to a church that eventually turned into a cult. And that was really hard for me and was traumatizing, because it was a time in the 1980s where everything, was geared towards the charismatic movement. And in that, my parents...
So can I slow you down a little bit?
Yes.
Can I
you sure can.
Because you're like, there's a lot of things in there. One is the disabilities, which I'm sure created a probably a way of doing life that you had to deal with. That's not necessarily a common thing.
Right.
So like, how did that impact you as a kid, seeing that, and then watching your parents go through? And then we'll talk about the cult thing in a second here, but like, how did that leave an impact on you?
Well, I was 5 when my older brother, Matt, started tripping and falling. And my parents didn't realize, what was going on. Maybe he was just, being a little klutz or walking too fast and tripping. But then it just started getting worse. And then again, this is early 80s, and technology wasn't at our fingertips like it is now. Right. And so through many doctor's appointments, he was led to St. Louis, and they did a procedure on him where they cut into his arm and took some muscle out and did some testing on it. And it came back that he had a Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And unfortunately, a lot of boys who they're the recipient of the disease. Girls are the ones that pass it on. They're the carriers, but only boys are affected by Duchenne's. And so my mother was a carrier of the gene, that gave it to the boys. But I think Matt was 7 when he had that procedure done on his arm. And when it came back that he had Duchenne's, the doctors let my mother and father know that most boys don't live to see their 18th birthday with Duchenne's, the type of disease that it is. And at that time, they already had several boys in the family, and it was in God's hands at that point. And so they knew that children are a blessing from God, and God don't make mistakes. And so for me, it was learning to live with a brother that at that time just one, tripping and falling. I didn't know any different. He was my best friend. And
Yeah.
so I learned how to pick him up. I'd grab his belt loops and put his rear end on my knee and kind of push him up and, grab him around the waist and would help him up that way, when he would trip. My parents did everything they could to keep him out of a wheelchair. But by the time he was 13, he was permanently in a wheelchair full time at that time until he passed. But it was, for me, it was just a way of life. It helped me to see that you have to truly see that they are a child of God, an image bearer, no matter what their physical, body looks like. And I grew up learning, that it doesn't matter if you're red or yellow, black or white, if you have all your limbs or you don't, that you truly are, a spirit of God. A child of God, I'm sorry. And for me, I just saw, I was oblivious to disabilities in the world. I loved everybody.
It was just
And
part
that
of
truly was,
part of growing up, it sounds like.
yeah. And so was it hard? Absolutely. And then the next one, my younger brother, Joshua, he was the next one, after me. He was about 11 by the time he was in a wheelchair permanently. And then Isaac, he saw the attention the other two brothers were getting being in a wheelchair. And not that he gave up, but he was like, oh, life is easy, no chores and, all the attention. And so he didn't try as hard as the other two to stay out of a wheelchair, which was a lot of work in rehab. And so he was about 10 by the time he was in a wheelchair as well. And so by then, my parents had a routine down and, I was a caregiver, through all of that. Was it hard? Yes, but I didn't know any different. And so I feel like I am who I am today because of the way that my parents, raised my brothers. They never allowed my brothers to accept their disability as a disability, or that it was, they had ever done something wrong. God made them special and this is what we're going to do. Now, all three of my brothers went through a really rough spot as teenagers and they were angry with God. All their friends were running and jumping and playing games and basketball and football, and they couldn't do those things. And so
how did it affect you though? How did that impact you
it was hard. It was hard to see them going through that stage because we had always done everything that we could to make sure they had the best life possible. And then seeing them kind of go off on their own was hard for me because I'm like, how can you do that? God has brought us so far. It was challenging for me to see how they could do that. Not that they turn their back on God, but to be angry at God. That was hard. I'm like, you have life and some people aren't given that privilege to even live this long. And so it was challenging for me to accept what they were doing, but I wasn't, no pun intended, walking in their shoes.
Right.
And so it was hard for me to see them struggle. But again, all three have, came back to their faith. And it has been a wonderful testimony, to see how God has used their disability to reach out and to touch others.
Yeah. So then the other thing that you mentioned was the fact that you guys started going to a church that ended up turning into pretty much a cult, as you were saying. Did that have same impact in a different way? Like, how did that impact as a child, like looking at life? Was that
I was about 6 years old when my parents finally realized, that the church they thought they were attending, was going to help them grow spiritually, realize that it was more man driven than God driven. And that has been the case for a lot of churches around here. They don't want God to be their number one. It just turns into a power trip. And it was sad, and my traumatizing event on that is I got a strawberry shortcake doll for my 5th birthday. And when you squeezed her belly, she would blow you a strawberry, scented kiss. And she was my pride and joy. Obviously, I love strawberry shortcake and Holly Hobby, that again, early 80s. And, the church at the time believed that if you had an image of God inside of your house, a demonic spirit could dwell inside of it. They were considered a graven image. And the church made me hold that doll over a burning barrel and burn it because that was an image of God. She was made in the image of God, which would be, a little girl. And they made me burn it. And that just traumatized me for such a long time to think, what is going on here? At such an early age, I knew that something wasn't right. I didn't know the answer, but I just knew that wasn't right. And so once my parents, they apologized, obviously, once they came out of that. But how easy it is for people to be sucked into something where they feel like, hey, we're part of the team, we're part of a group. And, but I'm very thankful that my parents were mature enough to see, hey, this is not at all what God intended for his people.
Yeah.
And, we were out
Wow.
of that.
Wow, man, I don't even know if that's a lot. It's just
It
I mean,
is.
it's only been like 6 or 7 minutes and it's already a lot. And I love it because like it's the truth of who we are and how we're actually. So like, okay, to get right on track here, like what was the belief then that you stepped into as a young adult and, looking at your own life? Obviously you've had the experience of working with people with disability. You've had the experience of somebody trying to control you wrongly, and that, like you said, in a cult type manner. Like, how did you go? So here's what I'm saying is, like, a lot of people, the pendulum swings one way or the other. Like, it goes either all the way against and like, I'm done with God and I'm out, and other people are like, no, I'm going to stay in this cult aspect of it, and then I'm going to pass that on. And so where were you at? How did you like, this is how I want to live my adult life?
Yeah, for me, because I was the oldest, girl in the family, and then with my brothers having their disabilities, I was always the one in charge. I was the one that took care of my siblings and just always felt like the protector. And in my mind, I was the one that needed to protect my siblings, and how could I do that with my own life in Christianity? And so, not that I was being a know-it-all, but it helped me to see that there was always more out there, that you could never believe man. Now, God uses men, but when they stand at the pulpit and preach, for me, I needed to know, is that truth? Because of what I had come from. And so for me, it helped me to get into God's word even more, to seek the truth. Just because man says it from the pulpit doesn't make it, the truth. And so for me, I knew at that point, going into adulthood, that the truth needed to come from God's word, not from man's mouth. Now, can God use man? Absolutely.
I think that's so in today's world. I mean, whether it's in the church or actually in politics or in the world or whatever, that is a huge lesson.
Yeah,
to seek out to seek out and actually find out what's going on behind everything, and to seek the truth. And too many of us just blindly accept. And whether that's in a church setting or in a politician setting or in a business setting or in a corporate setting, we just blindly accept things instead of actually questioning. So that's really that's really incredible. I mean, I think it probably is the whole lesson. We just stop it right there. Just seek the truth. Seek the truth.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
I mean, as we transition kind of into some of the other, I call them the bend in the roads or things like that. What would you say would be? It sounds like you have a really good solid base already going into things, because there was a lot of trauma that you went through, a lot of challenges you went through even as a child. But was there something that as you entered adult life that you were like, well, this is how we're going to do it? And it sounds like you had a lot of responsibility, took care of a lot of people, maybe shouldered a lot of weight, maybe took on too much responsibility, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. So where were you at? Where was the bend? Where was the shift?
The bend for me, again, like I said, being the oldest, I was always knew that I was in charge, and I not that I can do it better, but I know that if I want something done, I was to do it myself, because then I knew it was done the best that it could be. But I grew up with that mindset of always being the one to step up and do it. When there's a need in the community, when, a need in the family, I was always the one to step up and do it. And then kind of in adulthood, I felt like I was being taken advantage of a lot. And so I kind of stepped back and was like, you know what, I'm not the only one here at work that can do things. I'm not the only one in church or in my family. But when I stepped back, things wouldn't get done. And then I felt the weight, of the world on my shoulders, that things weren't getting done. So then I would try to get back into the environment and the mindset of, well, then I'm the only one who's going to do it. So I need to do it, because I don't like things being left undone.
It's honestly, it sounds like the little red hen. I like, hey, who's going to help me bake the bread? And well, fine, I'll do it myself. It sounds a lot like that kind of the parable or story there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of, my mindset going into adulthood, that if it needs to be done, I'm going to be the one to do it. But what I didn't realize is I was robbing other people of their privilege of being on the team, that if I was the one always doing it, people knew that. They expected that I would do it, stay out of her way. And that could leave a really bad impression on others, that I was the one, like a control freak. And that's not my intent at all. But I can see what happens when things don't get done. And I always want to make sure that things are done right and accordingly. And so learning to step back. But the bending point for me, really was, go ahead.
That's what I was going to say, is like, how did you learn to step back? How did you realize that was it?
God kind of has a way of making sure that you get some rest. But what happened was I was heading to work one morning, making a left-hand turn, and a guy ran a red light doing 70 miles an hour and T-boned me. And after the car wreck, when the paramedics arrived, they thought they were doing a body recovery. They had so much damage that they could see through the car window. They really couldn't get me out right away. But my head went through the windshield. And so I do have a lot of short-term and long-term memory issues. But for me, though, that day, I have no memory of the accident. I had bits and pieces throughout, my recovery until I was brought home. But what that did for me, though, is with the memory issues, a majority of the things that I had learned as a child, through church, through my parents, it kind of was put on hold because I had to learn to walk and talk again. I had to learn who my family was. And so I was starting from scratch. And I was like, as a Sunday school teacher or as a teacher, there's things that you learn, but I felt like I wasn't giving God 110%. I was doing just enough to get by. And then realizing how quickly your life can be gone. I mean, it was a true miracle that I survived the wreck. And I was in recovery for almost a year. And like I said, it was a lot. But what it did is it had me to literally, I was bedridden for quite some time. I had to lay in bed, and what else did I have? I had my thoughts, and I had my mind, to think about, what I could remember of my past, and was it things that I was proud of, or could I have done differently, or, what can I do in the future? Because I could see that I got a second chance at life, and what could I do to make, my parents proud, my family proud, and God proud, in the future? What can I do? And he just took it from there. He took it from there.
Yeah. You're hitting a nerve in my own life. Just the whole aspect of the control aspect, and thinking that you have to do it yourself, and then taking all of that away. And I can feel it, just the empathy. Anyway, I can totally feel that. But
sorry.
Don't be sorry. I mean, like, honestly, it's impacting me in a deep way right now. Being the oldest child, I can totally relate with everything that you're saying. But looking at that change, that realization, how has that impacted as far as being able to become a better, craft a story in a way now where you are enabling people to serve, enabling people to be better, and encourage them to either grow in their own personal lives or in their walk, or telling people, like, how did the crash, how did that, like, now looking at it, what are your beliefs, and how are you living your life in that way now that allows and enables people to be better and stronger?
Yeah. It's a tough question, Tim. I will tell you that I always knew about God because I was told about him from my parents. I was told about him from a man at a pulpit, from the people in my community. It was a man that I knew as God, and then Jesus. You read about him in a storybook. There's stories about him, and you have Christmas plays and Easter plays, and so he was a character basically in my mind. But I knew to respect him, and again, I loved him and wanted to serve him. That's not it. But the day of my car wreck, they call, what is it called? Near-death experience. People have those all the time. But for me, what happened was I felt like God was holding me in his arms. I couldn't see it. And there's a lot of times I can't put it into words where other people can understand it. But the presence of God, I have no doubt, was holding me and keeping me alive during my surgeries and during my recovery time. And so it was a one-on-one connection that I had with my Heavenly Father. And for me, that was the change, that he's real. He's right there, and he's there for all of us. But that was a choice for me that I had to make, was to understand that, God did not intend for that wreck to happen, but what did he do? He came in and he saved me, and he cared for me through the time, when I needed him most. And that just opened my eyes to realizing that every single day is a blessing from him. Not everybody gets that privilege. And then, at times I do suffer with the idea that other people weren't so blessed. And, so I have survivor's guilt at times. But that is just part of, they say, the PTS that comes with being involved in an accident, and then understanding that I'm human and it's okay to not understand why I'm the one, who got to survive that. But God's grace and love, gets me through every day. But it truly was for me knowing that before he was just, someone in a book, and then now he's real and tangible. And I want to make sure that others have the opportunity to feel and see that to the best of my ability.
So how do you use that to craft your story, to create your story in today's world?
In today's world,
what do you do different now than what you did previously?
I will intentionally seek out people in my community and in my church when I see them struggling and say, hey, you know what? I know you're struggling. I know you seem like, you're in a hard spot, and I can't say I know what you're going through, but now let me tell you what happened to me. And I try to use my testimony, my story, to help guide them through, what? I didn't feel like I was someone who could have this conversation. I could not have had this conversation 10 years ago. That's how long ago my wreck was. But 10 years ago, I could not be having this conversation today. I just know that I couldn't. And so for me, my intent is greater. My intent is to make sure that people know my story, and that no matter where you're at in life, God can always be right there, to help you. Or like, we're all human. But at times, we feel like the weight of the world is on our shoulders, but all we have to do is willingly let it go. It's a choice that you have to make. And again, in life, all choices. And my thing is, my kids jokingly tell me on my tombstone is going to say actions have consequences. And so
that's true.
I want to make sure that, my actions represent, Christ at all times. And so I intentionally make sure that my actions are pleasing to the Lord. So it has kind of changed how I see things and how I communicate with others.
So let me ask you this, because I see a kind of segments in your life here, or seasons in your life, where one, you were the caregiver to your brothers. Two, the next season then was this aspect that you had to have care given to you. And
Right.
You had to actually go through like you said, it was about a year-long recovery. And then even, I would assume today, even there's sometimes when you deal with things that come up, whether they're triggers or whatever, I'm assuming that there are things that happen that way. That's a big transition, going from the caregiver to the one being cared for.
Absolutely.
How does that now impact how you see people? How does that impact, or did it change? Maybe it's the same, I don't know, but like, how did that switch or change going into now where you're at, as far as, I know you serve several teachers and you work in the office there, but like, how did anything change, if any? What was that like?
Yeah, it has. For me, caring for my brothers and others in the community as well. But it was a mindset that, I'm thankful that God has given me the ability to do it. And then when I was the one being cared for, it was a blessing to see that people were going out of their way to come and help me. Many people in the community prepared meals for my husband and children. They would do my laundry. My best friend would come and clean the house. My hairdresser would come to our home and cut our hair for us because I couldn't get out and do it, or take my kids to do those things. And to see the community come in and support me like that, I was like, that was awesome. And it was nice to see that there are good people in the world. And for me, being able to be the one at the time being cared for, to see that they were going out of their way to do it, did I thank them enough? Do you really understand the burden that it takes to care for others? And I don't think that I was very thankful in the beginning, but obviously, as medicated as I was, I couldn't communicate very well. So I wanted to make sure that others could see how thankful I was. But also always to make sure that when you're helping others, that you see them on a level that dignity, there are things that I couldn't do and other people had to do it. And it was hard, and so for me, caring for my brothers, to make sure that at all times too, that dignity is what was most important, I guess, out of all of that. So, and then going into taking care of others, the same thing.
Right. So how do you, like, in your daily life now too, working with those that are under your care or under your supervision, whatever you want to call that, how does that impact you now today in your, like, I'll call it your business life, because that's
Right.
kind of where you're at.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I always want to, I guess maybe the thing is like always expect the worst, but plan for the best, and I come into every day knowing that maybe my smile is the only one that people can see. And I always accept people when they come in now, as I don't know what they're facing at home, what the morning that they had with their kids, with their spouse or whatever. So when they come here, I always want to make sure that I greet them with a smile and then give them some positivity in their life. Hey, I love your shirt today, or I love your smile. You have a good
Yeah.
attitude. Yeah, I'm again being more direct and intent. But for me, every day I want to make sure that my team knows that they're cared for, that they're appreciative, and that is how I do things differently. Before, I just didn't, not that I didn't care, but I didn't think to say thank you. When
Right.
I was being cared for. So that kind of opened my eyes to let others know how appreciative you are. And so for me, I have a boss that does the same for me. He's always going above and beyond to make sure, that I know how appreciative he is of me and what I do here. And so I pass that on to the staff here as well, making
Wow.
sure that they know that what they're doing is changing lives, and we appreciate that.
Yeah. So as we wrap up here, is there anything that you feel like, look, Tim, I just have to say this. I've got to get this out, because this is the one thing that's on my heart, it's on my brain. I've got it. What would that one thing be, if there's something that you want to make sure somebody drives home that point? Don't forget.
Yeah, yeah. I have so much to say, but try to narrow it down would be treat others as you would want them to treat you. And to make sure that you're turning the cheek at times, that to make sure that you realize that everybody out there is an image bearer, and we all have good days and we all have bad days, and don't hold one bad day to a person for the rest of their life. Don't judge them on their one bad day, and to make sure that you come down to their level. And just because they had a bad day, don't say, oh, let me pray for you for that. Get into their life and say, hey, what can we do differently so you don't have these bad days?
Yeah.
What caused that bad day? So for me, it would be don't hold people accountable for one bad day. Love them through it, pray with them, and then say, hey, tomorrow is a new day. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and get through it. So
Oh, that's amazing. Wow. So if somebody wanted to reach out to you and say, hey, I just need to talk to the Analisa, is that okay? Do you have a way to be able to?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
how would you tell them to reach out to you? And obviously you probably don't want to give out your cell phone number, but
No, that's okay. I got a Yahoo account, still email. People laugh at me for that, but that's okay. I'm old school. So it would be woods595@yahoo.com.
all right, perfect. Yeah, because like I told you, hearing your story, I hear a lot of my own life in there, being an oldest and the responsibility and the whole 9 yards of that. And man, I'm just hearing a lot of that aspect of being a caregiver. And I guarantee you, especially people that are our age growing up as the oldest, or, I guarantee that's going to relate with people 100%. So again, thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, you're welcome.
I don't even know how to express all my gratitude just for the fact that you're sharing, because it was really, really awesome. Anything else? You good? Or I'm going to close out if we're good.
No, yeah, I think that's stuff. Like I said, with my memory issues and things like that, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share my story and my testimony. And just with anything, for me, I always say Jesus is enough.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Again, great episode, guys and gals that are listening. I'm almost at a loss for words, just because I've gone through several different of the episodes and several different stories. And the more that I hear from people, the more I am impressed with the fortitude of the human spirit, the caring, the compassion that comes from individuals that have gone through a bend in the road. And knowing that if you are going through the bend in the road right now by yourself, you are not alone, and that there are people out there that have gone through it. If you need to reach out either to myself or to Analisa or any of those that are on the podcast, I know from their stories and from their hearts, they are willing to help you. So please feel free to reach out, contact us. And again, we just appreciate hearing about the stories, hearing about what's going on in people's lives and the real stories. So thanks again. And until next time, we shall close this out.